The car was legal on Friday. By Sunday night, it was neutered. They didn't call it a ban, they called it a clarification. You know that word. It's the FIA's velvet hammer. Overnight, a front-running car turns average, and the paddock shrugs like that's normal. Here's the deal. Rules don't appear out of nowhere. They're fired like missiles at whoever's embarrassing everyone else. We're rewinding through the precise moments where innovation met politics and got strangled. If you don't understand this cycle, you don't understand who actually holds power in F1. It's not safety versus speed, it's control versus independence. To see it, go back to when the car drove the driver. Williams didn't just build a fast car, they built a system. Active suspension, traction control, ABS, an orchestra of sensors and code flattening lap time. The brutal truth is, they solved what drivers can't, keeping ride height perfect while the aero does its work. On bumpy, high downforce tracks, that's a cheat code. The chassis stayed planted, the diffuser stayed fed, and rivals fought the stopwatch with lawyers because they couldn't fight it with setup sheets. Here's the key detail. Active suspension wasn't a gimmick, it managed the car's attitude in real time. Brake, the nose doesn't dive. Hit a curb, the platform doesn't bounce. Mid-corner, the rake sits right where the aero map wants it. That means stable downforce, predictable balance, and tires that don't get chewed to ribbons by oscillations. Meanwhile, traction control and ABS smooth the violence on corner exit and braking. Less wheel spin, fewer lockups, more consistency. It's not just quicker, it's repeatable. So, how do you beat a car that erases human error mechanically? You don't. You redefine driver skill and make electronics the villain. The narrative shifted fast. Purity, heroics, the driver at the center again. That's the sales pitch. And yet the stopwatch didn't care. Williams' electronic suite was a masterclass in engineering coherence. Everyone else, staring at printouts, praying for a wet Sunday. Then came 1994. Most electronic aids are banned. Active suspension, traction control, ABS, gone. Framed as returning the sport to the driver. But the effect was blunt. Overnight, cars lost their artificial stability. Ride heights wandered, aero platforms wobbled. The same corners demanded more faith and more margin. Consistency bled out of the lap. You could hear the tires complain. The cars went from guided missiles to nervous thoroughbreds kicking under braking. And the politics didn't sit alone. The safety crisis of '94 turned the volume up on everything. Real risk, real consequences, and a grid trying to relearn mechanical grip while the rulebook kept shifting. The purity story blended with urgency. Changes aimed at speed and safety mixed, and the messaging got convenient. If you were dominant with electronics, you paid the bigger tax. That's exactly what happened. What nobody talks about enough is how invisible tech invites faster bans. If you can't point a camera at it and sell it to fans, it's always one meeting away from extinction. Active suspension worked in silence. Traction control just worked. No flames, no drama, just lap time. That's threatening because it makes drivers feel interchangeable, and that's bad business. Williams adapted, but the reset hurt. Everyone had to re-engineer the fundamentals. Springs, dampers, anti-roll, geometry, aero stiffness. The car's platform couldn't be faked anymore. Setups turned into hostage negotiations with tire temperature. Teams that relied on software had to build new muscle overnight. Some managed, others face-planted. Plant that idea. When dominance comes from tech you can't see, the counterpunch is fast and moralized. We'll see it again. Different hardware, same playbook. The next genius solution didn't use code, it used physics hidden in plain sight. So, the next masterstroke didn't blink, it barely moved. Renault put weight on springs inside the nose, tuned to the car's natural oscillations. A mass damper. When the front end hit curbs or the aero load shifted, the damper counter-moved. Net effect, the chassis stayed calmer, the front tires stayed in their window, and turn-in felt like it was nailed to the apex. That's not hype, that's physics doing quiet work. Here's the deal. Aero downforce isn't stable. It breathes with ride height, yaw, pitch. If your platform wobbles, your aero map falls off a cliff. Renault's damper damped the wobble. Steering input translated predictably. The diffuser stayed fed because the front didn't pitch like a seesaw. And over a race stint, the tires didn't get shredded by micro bounces. That's free lap time disguised as comfort. Crucially, it passed scrutineering, multiple times. Scrutineers saw the device, weighed it, signed off. Everybody knew it existed. Nobody had a problem until the points piled up. And then the old song began. Rivals whispered about movable aerodynamics. They argued the damper influenced the airflow by stabilizing the platform, therefore it was aero, therefore it moved, therefore illegal. That's not a technical argument, that's a legal trap built out of definitions. The FIA didn't ban it on day one. They issued clarifications, then more clarifications. The device that was hardware yesterday became aero by mid-season. Think about that. The part didn't change, the category did. And that's the lever. If you can reclassify a chassis device as aero, you can force it under the no movable aero rule. Embarrassing advantage becomes dangerous precedent. On track, the change hurt immediately. Renault pulled the damper, and the car lost that front-end glue. You saw earlier turn-in snaps, You saw more understeer on longer stints as fronts overheated unevenly. Meanwhile, the rivals who pushed the protests suddenly looked alive. Balance's momentum, and the title margin tightened lap by lap. What nobody knew at the time was how cleanly this would draw the battle lines for the next decade. Hardware that stabilizes aero gets treated like aero. If it influences airflow indirectly, it's still guilty. That's the precedent. And it teaches teams a grim lesson. Legality is provisional until you win too much. Then the part moves. The brutal truth is Renault didn't break the rules, they broke the pecking order. And the pecking order has lawyers. This was the moment engineers learned to bury innovation in plain sight, or prepare for a mid-season execution dressed up as governance. You think that's harsh? Wait until the floor starts sucking the car into the ground and the entire field gets split by a hole in the rules. Small teams usually bring hope and a new paint job. In 2009, 3 of them brought a reading list: Braun, Toyota, Williams. They stared at the rear-end regulations, reference planes, step planes, openings, and noticed the wording didn't fully close the path for a secondary airflow channel. Build a diffuser with an extra path, feed it from cleverly placed holes, energize the flow, get more expansion, more downforce at the rear, especially at low speeds where everyone else struggled. Here's where everything shifted. The FIA looked, winced, and allowed it for the season. Legal, with a note. Rival giants fumed and filed protests. While they argued, Braun locked in wins because you can't just photocopy a flaw. The entire car architecture, gearbox casing shapes, rear crash structure, suspension packaging, had been optimized for that airflow. Copying meant surgery, not tape. By the time the field adapted, the points buffer was a wall. Impact, title momentum got hard-baked into the calendar, and the next year, the door slammed, regulations tightened, the double diffuser loophole died in the margins of a PDF. That wasn't the lap time falling off a cliff. That was a pen moving across the page. Dominance neutralized without touching a single wheel nut. But engineers don't stop. They rerouted power, exhaust-blown diffusers, use hot gas to energize the diffuser edge, off throttle, keep flow alive with clever engine maps, turn the engine into a hairdryer for corners, more rear grip on entry, more aero consistency when the car needs it most. It's not just power, it's stability disguised as noise. Then came the mapping tug of war. Technical directives landed like weekly weather reports. Hot blowing, cold blowing, you can't keep throttle open with no driver input. You can. Okay, you can at 10%. No, wait, 5. Friday legal, Saturday questionable, Sunday neutered. Drivers said the car felt like a different beast between sessions. That's because it was. The aero platform was being dialed up and down by an email chain. This is where stewards turned into referees for balance of power. Definitions, not lap time, decided who had traction out of turn 3. The politics was shameless. Teams lobbied through safety language, cost language, sporting fairness. Everyone knew the real game. Freeze the competitor's advantage before your own copy works. Or better, legislate their concept into the bin. On track, the turbulence was brutal. Corner entry became a coin flip for some. If your off-throttle blowing vanished overnight, your rear went light at the worst moment, and every driver rediscovered faith in the brake pedal. That shifted the championship context. Points swung not just with upgrades, but with interpretations. You can call that responsive governance, or you can call it moving the goalposts mid-penalty. And yet, the logic held: if air can be illegal, so can the way the car moves to catch it. Enter the next escalation, where suspension behaved like an aerodynamicist in disguise. No wing change, no new appendage. Just hydraulics coordinating chassis attitude, so the floor sees the world it wants to see. The crackdown would arrive with the same soft language. Clarification, guidance, directive, because that's the playbook. The brutal truth is this: clever readings beat budgets. But clever readings also paint a target on your back. Braun's hole in the rules flipped the grid for months. Exhaust blowing turned engine maps into aero devices, and the FIA reacted in real time with a dial. Meanwhile, fans were told it was about consistency. It wasn't. It was about control. While that was happening, the big teams learned a darker, more durable lesson. If your advantage depends on fluid, moving phenomena, airflow, vortices, plume behavior, don't get comfortable. Someone will argue it's being manipulated indirectly. Someone else will write a test you can't pass twice. That leaves us at one blunt, unavoidable question. Do you engineer the fastest car or the least bannable concept? In modern F1, the second one wins you more seasons than you'd like to admit. Here's where everything shifted again. Engineers stopped adding wings and started choreographing the car's attitude. FRIC, front-rear interconnected suspension, linked the corners of the car with hydraulics so pitch and roll weren't random. Under braking, the nose didn't dump. Mid-corner, the platform didn't sag. On throttle, rake stayed where the floor liked it. No sensors needed, no code, just plumbing that made the chassis behave like a calm, predictable wind tunnel model at 300 km per hour. The brutal truth is FRIC turned suspension into stealth aero. It didn't create downforce, it protected it. On high-speed change of direction, the car wasn't wobbling into a different aero map every half second. Tires stayed in their window because load didn't spike and vanish. That's lap time disguised as ride comfort. and it made some cars look glued while others tiptoed. But here's the key detail. Because FRIC touched chassis attitude, rivals argued it was a driver aid and an aerodynamic influence. That opened the same legal trap we saw with the mass damper. If it changes the airflow indirectly, it's aero, therefore movable, therefore questionable. A technical directive warned teams, the tone said optional. The paddock heard mandatory, everyone yanked it mid-season rather than risk disqualification, and balance sheets turned into mood rings. On track, the effect was immediate. Cars that leaned on FRIC lost platform control. Braking zones got longer. Curb rides grew unpredictable. Tire windows shrank to postage stamps. If your setup philosophy assumed stable rake, you were in trouble. The teams that built mechanical support into springs, dampers, and geometry adapted faster. Others discovered what it's like to reverse engineer your car philosophy between Fridays. Then came the flexi-wings era, the long cold war of carbon fiber pretending to be steel until speed exposes the lie. Wings passed static tests in the garage, weights hung, deflection measured, then bowed gracefully on straights to trim drag and stood firm in corners to keep load. You can call it clever laminate layup and hinge line tuning. It is. You can also call it performance art in front of slow motion cameras. The FIA responded by changing the tests, the markings, and the surveillance. New load cases, stickers on end plates to track bending, onboards calibrated to judge rotation. Overnight, some cars lost straight line speed, others kept corner load but paid a drag tax they hadn't paid in months. DRS battles flipped, teams recut flaps and spars, guessing where the next tolerance would land. That's the pattern. Movement became the enemy. Not flashy movement, but the small, controlled motions that make an aero map stable. Frick flattened pitch, flexi-wings redistributed load with speed. Each time, directives reframe the same principle. If your car changes shape or stance to keep downforce happy, expect a letter. Not a regulation written for next year. A letter that changes this Sunday. If you still think the rulebook is neutral, watch how fast thresholds shift when one car looks too calm through high speed. That's not safety. That's control. And it sets up the next fight where the bodywork stayed the same, but the horsepower curve got rewritten by email. Software became horsepower. You could light up qualifying with an aggressive map, fuel flow on the edge, ERS deployment front-loaded, MGUK handing out energy like candy, and then dial it back for the race to survive. Fans called it party mode because it was obvious who'd pressed the big red button on Saturdays. The brutal truth is it turned Saturdays into a ritual humiliation for everyone who couldn't afford the thermal and reliability cost. Then the directive landed. One mode for qualifying and race, framed as cost control and reliability, sold as fairness. But you know the subtext: cap the peak, compress the grid, make Sunday less predictable. Overnight, teams had to choose a compromise map. Qualifying spikes flattened. Race stints got steadier. The car that thrived on one-lap nuclear deployment lost its calling card, and front rows shifted by tenths that used to appear from nowhere. Here's the deal. When the FIA reduces freedom in power unit modes, it doesn't just trim top speed, it changes how you harvest and spend energy. Lift and coast margins, battery state of charge strategy, MGUK clipping at the end of straights. Everything gets re-optimized. You saw overtakes decided by who timed deployment, not who had the bigger number on the dyno. It's racing, yes. It's also central planning by spreadsheet. Meanwhile, steering wheels turned into launch panels. Multi-maps ran brake migration, engine braking, differential preload, and energy blending through state machines. One wrong input and you're a passenger. Brake magic became the household name because it bit in public. A driver toggled a mode that spiked front brake bias for warm-up, then forgot to reset, and the car plowed straight on. That wasn't stupidity. That was the cost of driving a computer with gloves on. Scrutiny tightened. More directives. Define what a switch can do. Define how many profiles can exist. Define how assistance crosses into driver aid. Teams narrowed the sandbox to avoid protests, and drivers carried more mental load to stay inside a shrinking box. Then porpoising brought the hammer wrapped in safety paper. Ground effect made floors sensitive to ride height and plank stiffness. Some cars oscillated violently. The FIA introduced new floor deflection tests, plank wear scrutiny, and a ride height metric to limit vertical acceleration. TD039. In the name of safety, the envelope moved. Stiffer floors, revised edges, higher ride heights. Certain architectures, those mining low-slung aero efficiency, paid a heavier tax than others. Balance of concept shifted mid-season without a single new bodywork line in the regs. Call it protection, call it governance. It functioned like balance of power tuning. And just like party mode, it didn't target a part. It targeted a strategy. The message is consistent. If your advantage depends on invisible control, software states, elasticity under load, aero floors, skating low, expect an email. We end where we started. The rulebook is a steering wheel. Hands change, force changes, direction changes. The car stays fast until it embarrasses the field. Then clarity arrives. Here's the brutal truth. The rulebook isn't neutral. It's a pressure valve turned toward whoever stretches the field. Innovation wins right up until it humiliates the grid, then definitions shift and the advantage dissolves. So tell me, where's your line? Was it mass dampers, party mode, or the diffuser warfare that rewrote seasons by memo? Drop your take in the comments. Subscribe if you want more analysis that cuts through PR fog and calls the politics by name. And watch the next episode on cost caps and those gentlemen's agreements that somehow always tilt the table.